All right, so James, we're out here at Pine Glades, and in the short drive from Jupiter Ridge out here, we passed Delaware Scrub, Limestone Creek, North Jupiter Flatwoods, and Cypress Creek natural areas, and also Riverbend Park. There's just so much to see here in the Palm Beaches, and in this short walk into the natural area here, I mean, we've already seen a ton of birds.
Just coming here this morning, we've seen sandhill cranes and great wading birds, great blue herons, and we've seen tricolored herons and little blue herons. So just a great diversity of wading birds, and this place is really good for overwintering waterfowl too. So it's just a fantastic area with a lot of diversity, and the most important bird here from probably a biological and conservation standpoint are the snail kites that we saw when we walked in.
Right, absolutely, and we can see here on the ground why these snail kites are here. I mean, the ground is just littered with these apple snails, and this is the main prey item of the snail kites and also the limpkins that are out here as well. And like I said, the shoreline is just littered with these things, so we can tell just how productive this habitat is.
And there are two species of apple snails, right? There's an invasive apple snail species, and then there's the Florida apple snail. Tell me a little bit about that.
Right. So the invasive species, it's the main one we see is the larger apple snail species, the Channel Island apple snail. And you know, we were really worried in the biological community about what effect the exotic apple snails coming into this habitat would have specifically on the endangered snail kites. But we're lucky enough to have Mark Cook here, and he can tell us a little bit about how the snail kites have actually adapted and are thriving with this new exotic snail.
Well, stick with us, because on our way in here, we came across Mark Cook on his day off, and he's here to tell us a little bit more about these snail kites and how important they are to this fragile ecosystem. You know, Mark, it's always amazing to me that you think that at certain times in Florida's history, there have been incredibly low numbers of snail kites. And I've heard figures that snail kites were perilously close to extinction in Florida, and probably only 60 to 80 birds remaining at some stage. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yes, the issue with South Florida is we've changed the management of the water to such an extent. We drained so many habitats, so many wetland habitats. We've changed the way the hydrology operates, and that's really impacted the main prey of the snail kite, which is the apple snail, the Florida apple snail. And because that native species has declined so much, you know, obviously with the snail kite being a specialist, that snail kite population plummeted. Even 10 years ago, 2008, 2007, populations of snail kites were heading straight down. We were really worried that we were actually going to lose them from South Florida. But this exotic species of apple snail, their populations expanded considerably, and literally it was the lifesaver for this endangered species we have, the snail kite. Really what we want is to restore wetlands to get the native species back. There's a number of studies that have shown that these exotic species may have some sort of impacts. They potentially might have diseases that may impact the native snails or even the snail kite themselves. We're showing in various studies, various experiments, that these larger snails actually outgrow the native species. If these guys are expanding and the native species decline, we've got problems, because sometimes these exotic species, their populations expand and then all of a sudden they drop. So if we have a drop with this exotic species, we could be at square one again with the kite.
Absolutely, and you know, we're talking about a species here that has evolved to feed on a niche in the environment on one particular species, the apple snail. So when you look at a snail kite and you look at its bill, it's got that down curved bill, and when you watch them feeding, it's absolutely fascinating, because they'll pick up a snail from the surface of the water and they'll take it to a perch, and then they will shuck the inside of that snail with that incredibly well designed bill to pull out the meat inside that snail. And it's a fascinating process to watch, and it really is amazing that these two species, the survival of these two species, is so dependent not only on the water levels in Florida, but also on each other. A lot of birders, when they come down to Palm Beach County, they don't often think of snail kites as a target species, because most birders will look for them around areas like Okeechobee and furthermore in the central or northern areas of the state. But right here in Palm Beach County, you have some fantastic habitat for snail kites. And I think we've got one right here, Mark.
Yes, we've got one right up in these trees up here. And here in Pine Glades, these wetlands, they're shorter hydroperiod wetlands that surround the Everglades. They're the old headwaters of the Everglades, and these natural areas are absolutely essential for breeding birds actually in the Everglades. At this time of year, there's nothing breeding in the Everglades, but the wading birds and the snail kites and everything else, they still need food and they need to build up their energy to get into breeding condition. And so these wetlands are absolutely crucial. They can support hundreds, if not thousands, of foraging birds prior to them nesting in the Everglades. So that's why these areas are just so important.
Absolutely, and so fantastic that just a 10 or 15 minute drive from the urban areas of Palm Beach County, we can get into one of these natural areas and view a Florida speciality, the Florida snail kite. Now, these ephemeral wetlands are not only important for birds, but a whole diverse variety of other wildlife, like bobcats. And here this morning, we've got fresh footprints of a nice bobcat that's been walking down, probably had a drink of water here, and is now headed back into the thick scrub.
So we're still in Pine Glades, and we're about a mile down south of the parking lot here. I left James and Mark, they're locked in on the snail kite up north. But I wanted to come down here and highlight this habitat here, this low grass and low palmetto and scattered pines. And this is a great spot to come and look for the northern bobwhite. So bobwhites used to be really numerous here in South Florida all throughout the state. But FWC is actually asking the public to report sightings now because their range has contracted so much. And the reason for that, in large part, is fire suppression. So the actual fact that we are reintroducing prescribed fire here on our natural areas, this land here we're standing in did not look like this 10 years ago. It was grown up, bushes all over the place, palmettos, but with the reintroduction of fire and management, we have this low grass here and low palmetto habitat that the bobwhites love. And now this is one of the best places and most consistent places where you can come out in the springtime and hear these birds, and if you're lucky, even see one.